Hey, welcome to rLounge. Time to pull up a chair because we've got another great story for you today. Sometimes people leave a lasting impression on you, and sometimes that impression is a stinking old pool festering in the summer heat. Today on rLounge, it's a not-so-beautiful day in the neighborhood. Entitled neighbor wants copy of grandma's will. When my grandmother was diagnosed with cancer, she opted for no treatment. She had watched her husband go through chemo, radiation, and surgery, and he was miserable the whole time. She didn't want that for herself. Her family supported her. Over the next year, she gifted items to family and friends, told us to write our names on the things we want, take what we wanted, etc. There were conditions. No, you can't have that. It's a family heirloom meant to go to Aunt and her kids, or to Dad and his kids. We all knew what those items were and who they were going to, so that it was easily settled after she died. The house was inherited by my father, who very suddenly and unexpectedly passed away 2 weeks later. I inherited the house at that point. The next-door neighbor, we'll call him Todd, came over several times, upset that he and his kids, 21 female, 19 male, weren't invited to Grandma's funeral. There wasn't one. We were all too busy reeling from my father's death. Weren't presented with a copy of the will. It only included family members. And he knew Grandma loved his kids like her own. She didn't. She complained about them coming over all the time, stealing her water to fill their pool, and she had to tell them to stop calling her Grandma. He wanted to know if I would allow his kids to go through the house to see if there was anything they'd like to take to remember her by. Okay, first, dude, my grandma died 4 weeks ago. And dude, my dad died 2 weeks ago. I thought he was awfully rude, but I offered to let them go through the boxes I had picked that I was planning to donate, and he was offended. I mean, mortified. He said his daughter and son had their hearts set on some items that were family heirlooms, and I literally laughed at him. I explained they were family heirlooms and would be staying with me, and 2 of the items had already gone home with my brother. He said, "My kids were her family and she would have gifted those to them. They should have been included along with everyone else when everything was divided up." Keep in mind that none of us knew this guy or his kids other than the neighbors next door. They were never at any family gatherings that were held at her house, and the only time I ever heard her talk about them was when she was complaining about them, especially when she caught them using both her hoses to fill up their pool, and then came over complaining because she had put locks on the outer faucets. Luckily, Todd's house was in foreclosure and he moved away about a year later. I have more stories, but those will come later. Edit. This seriously blew up. I'm still going through comments, but wow, you all are hysterical. I wish I'd had the wherewithal to do even half the things in the moment that you've suggested. I did want to clear a few things up. 1. This happened a little over 10 years ago. We were all prepared for Grandma's passing, and while we were sad, we were also, but my dad's passing was unexpected and absolutely devastating. He was my best friend, and I feel his loss almost daily. I'm surprised at how much everyone's condolences mean to me, even after so many years. Thank you. 2. Todd brought up this subject 3 times in the year he lived next door, all within about 2 weeks. This particular incident was the end of it. The first 2 times were eyebrow-raising hints, where I walked away not really sure if I was interpreting his words correctly. This time he was brazenly clear, and when I laughed and told him he couldn't have the items he listed, he never brought it up again. Let's see what some folks in the community think. The first thought says, I would have slowly shut the door on him, making extremely uncomfortable eye contact with a twitch in my left eye. Literally, what the F? Someone else says, practicing that eye twitch in the mirror now. Another person says, I got that down, but I can't get the speed of the door right. Dang it. Maybe if someone else closes the door slowly for me, that'll surely work. The next person says, kids don't get their hearts set on inheriting things. This was a grifter hoping to get something to pawn. The OP replies, I agree, although I didn't realize it at the time. His house was being foreclosed on, and his son had a drug habit. About a month before they moved out, my house was broken into, but I came home and they ran out the back door as I came in the front. The only thing they got was my laptop. Alarm system and cameras were up within 2 weeks of that. I always suspected it was the son, but there was nothing to point towards him. Someone from the audience says, my theory, calling her grandma was probably about trying to get close enough to commit financial fraud. They probably thought they had buttered her up enough to get named in the will. Clearly, your grandmother was on to them. They must not have been very smart, or they underestimated your grandmother. Who thinks someone isn't going to notice the water bill or someone else's hose? The OP replies, Grandma was no dummy. This might have worked on a lot of other unfortunate grandparents, but Grandma was spry right up to the Saturday when she called her daughter to say she was ready to go to hospice and died on Monday. I'm so sorry for your loss, OP. It's extremely insensitive of him to have those expectations while you were dealing with your grief. You were far too kind to let them go through things that you planned on donating. The comments make sense. Sounds like they were definitely trying to get their hands on something to sell for money. Clearly, they were just trying to use your grandmother for their own needs. Luckily, your grandma caught on to them quick. Update. Entitled Todd Strikes Again. So I mentioned in my earlier post that I had a few stories about Todd, my next door neighbor, who asked for a copy of my grandmother's will because he was certain she left him something. That was my first encounter with Todd. This was the last known encounter with Todd, but it was my neighbor's encounter, not mine. Todd had lived in his house for about 10 years before I moved next door. His house was in foreclosure when I arrived, and a year later, he was gone. To say the entire street was relieved is an understatement. There may have been a parade. An investor bought the house for a ridiculous amount and flipped it. The new owner didn't do much to the house after he moved in. He was a great neighbor, and when he passed away, we all missed him. The next owners, current owners, moved in and started really renovating the place. When the house was initially flipped, everything they did was simply cosmetic. These houses were built in the 50s, so a lot of things were seriously outdated. Plumbing had to be redone, electrical had to be redone, kitchen wasn't remodeled correctly, and had to be gutted. These poor people are pouring their blood, sweat, and tears into this house, but they love the house and the neighborhood, so it's all worth it to them. The new family had begun making very obvious changes to the house. First, they took out a planter's bed attached to the house and are working towards a more natural landscape. We lived in a very desert climate, so keeping grass can be kind of hard on the water bill. The next thing they did was start taking down a humongous palm tree that was literally planted in the middle of their 3-car driveway. Todd initially had a 1-car driveway. He planted the tree and then paved around it to make the driveway bigger. But by now, it had grown so big that you could only fit 1 car comfortably, and a second car had to be partially on the yard. Beginning work on that tree brought Todd out from under his rock. From what I understand, Todd had actually moved back to the state about a year or so after he left, and is currently living with his father just a few blocks away. One day he knocked on their door and demanded to know why they were taking down his tree. The wife, let's go with Amanda, was flabbergasted. I had told her Todd stories here and there, and she said she was simultaneously starstruck and confused as hell. He repeated his demand of knowing why they were cutting down his tree. He said they could not cut down that tree. It's his. He planted it when he first moved in, and he did not give them permission to cut it down. He then asked about the basketball hoop, which was also installed in the driveway. He said that was coming down too. He was angry. His kids played with that hoop. They grew up with it. Why would they take down a perfectly good basketball hoop and a perfectly healthy tree, especially when they didn't have permission? It seems Todd was under the impression that even if the house was no longer his, certain things around the house were. The tree, the basketball hoop, and the blocks from the planter. He didn't want those things, but he fully expected to be asked for his permission before making changes to those things, and he made it clear he would not give it, because they were his and he wanted them left right where they were. At some point, Amanda's brain kicked in, and Amanda is spiteful as all get out. She gave Todd a few choice words and told him to get off her property, that if he wanted his tree, he could haul it to his own house on the back of his bicycle for all she cared, but it was coming down, and if she saw him on her property again, he was going to meet her 3 dogs, and they loved the taste of trespassers. When the tree came down, and before they got the wood hauled off, they set a pile at the corner of the street with a great big sign that said, Todd's Tree. Amanda says she has not seen him since, and I have yet to see him, so I think all is peaceful in the neighborhood again. Good for them. Todd's Tree. That's hilarious. This guy seriously has no tact whatsoever, and he clearly doesn't understand how the world works. If he believed all of this belonged to him, then he shouldn't have let his house foreclose. Update. Entitled Todd and his Mosquito Horde. By now we all know that Todd's house was in foreclosure when I moved in next door. What I haven't mentioned is that Todd was very bitter and angry about this. He was very vocal about how the foreclosure was not his fault. The fault lay with the banks, his ex-wife, and even the other neighbors, because they drove up home prices by keeping their homes nice, I guess? Todd had taken out gargantuan home equity loans and defaulted on them. From what I heard from the other neighbors, the bank was actually going to pay him a bonus if he didn't trash the house when he left. Entitled Todd was living there for free and not actively destroying anything, but he also wasn't taking care of anything. If something broke, he just didn't fix it. If it looked bad or inconvenienced anyone, not his problem. When I moved in near the end of the summer, Todd's in-ground pool was about half full with water. It wasn't pretty water by any means. It was gross. It was scary. When the wind was right, it was fragrant. For some inexplicable reason, Todd eventually drained that disgusting pool of water into the street. That was fine, I guess. Now I could see an ugly, empty bowl in the yard next to me, but at least I wasn't concerned about whatever horror movie creature would crawl out of there at some point. Then it rained, and Todd's ugly, empty bowl got a little water. Not a lot, but enough for the mosquito bowl to open up for business. The mosquitoes came to stay, and they made our lives miserable. To say our neighborhood was infested with mosquitoes is not doing it justice. We literally could not go outside without getting eaten alive. They came in hordes. If you killed one, 3 more took its place. We all invested in whatever pest repellent we could to keep the hordes at bay, but nothing was working well enough to remain outdoors more than a few minutes. The neighbor on the other side of me, Joe, talked to Todd. Todd was apparently unrepentant. Joe offered to drain Todd's pool for him, and Todd refused. Told Joe to stay off his property. Todd and Joe did not like each other. Never did. The neighbor across the street called the city to complain. The city came out and talked to Todd. Todd explained that his pool equipment was broken and he wasn't inclined to do anything about it due to the foreclosure. So the city put fish in his pool. I highlight this because I had never heard of this before. But yes, the city put fish in the pool to eat the mosquito larvae to help keep the population down. This actually worked a little. The hordes were thinned, but not eradicated. The summer finally ended, the hordes left, died, and we could venture outdoors again. But, like it usually does, summer rolled around again, and the same thing happened. It rained, mosquitoes started hanging out, having one-night stands, propagating, and BAM! It was Mosquito Horde, the sequel. The city was called, the fish were brought, and we were absolutely miserable. Joe again approached Todd with his offer to drain the pool, and Todd again refused. We dealt with the horde for about 4 to 5 weeks the summer prior. Where I live, mosquito season can last 6 months. Our misery this summer was only beginning. Luckily, Joe was unemployed and had all the time in the world. Todd worked. One day, Todd left his house. Joe grabbed a hose, climbed over my fence with my permission, and drained Todd's pool. Every single time it rained, which was not often, Joe waited for Todd to leave work, climbed over my fence and drained that pool. He was our hero. Joe was a jerk, and I have some stories about him too, but that summer, he was the man. That marked the end of Todd's reign as he moved away at the end of that summer. Wow, what a piece of work. Of course he's the type of guy to not do anything and believe that none of it is his problem. What a lazy oaf. He sounds like the neighbor from hell who just unleashes his blood-sucking fiends on everyone. What a way to wreck being able to go into your own yard and enjoy summer. So long, Todd. It wasn't nice knowing you. Do you have or did you have a neighbor like Todd? Share your stories with us in the comments below. Thank you for following along today on rLounge. Before you go, be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell. If you have something you want to share regarding today's content, we want to hear it. See you soon.